Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling something pretty fascinating. We're going to be diving into this book, Cupid's Poisoned Arrow by Marnia Robinson. And she puts forth this idea that there's this hidden biological mechanism, and it could be messing with all of our love lives.
Oh, that is fascinating. It really makes you think twice about some of our assumptions about relationships, especially long-term relationships.
Yeah. So she starts off by talking about this phenomenon called the Coolidge effect. And this has been observed in mammals. It's this idea, like, imagine a male mammal, completely satisfied with their current partner, right? And then suddenly a new female is introduced, and boom, this burst of energy and interest.
Oh, wow.
It's like their biology just hits the reset button.
Yeah, it's so interesting how nature has all these mechanisms in place to ensure the continuation of the species, right?
Yeah.
Spreading those genes far and wide.
Yeah.
But obviously with us humans, it's a bit more complicated than just, your average lab rat.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for us humans, instead of just suddenly wanting a new partner, Robinson suggests this Coolidge effect might actually be the reason that we experience a gradual decline in desire with the same partner over time.
Right, like that familiar feeling, that you get used to the smell of your own home. It's not that it's bad, it's just you don't notice it as much anymore.
Exactly.
Habituation. And it can be a tricky thing to navigate in long-term relationships.
Mm.
And that's where this idea of Cupid's poison comes in. She links this habituation, particularly when it comes to sexual desire, to something that we usually associate with pleasure, with good feelings.
Okay.
An orgasm.
Hold on. Wait a minute. I thought orgasm is supposed to be this amazing bonding experience. It's supposed to be good. How can something that feels so good be the bad guy here?
Well, she's not saying that orgasm is bad, inherently.
Yeah.
What's interesting here is the frequency. She argues that frequent orgasms, while definitely pleasurable, trigger this chain reaction in our brains. And the result can actually be, over time, a decrease in desire, particularly for that same partner.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's not about, like, demonizing orgasm or anything like that. It's more about understanding that maybe there's a downside to constantly chasing that peak, that ultimate experience.
Exactly. It's about understanding that there might be a cost, a consequence, to constantly hitting the repeat button. She even shares a personal story about a partner who transformed after learning to avoid orgasm during intercourse.
Wait, really? What happened?
Well, the anecdote is quite powerful. It highlights a potential shift that can happen when we approach intimacy differently. But to understand why this is so significant, we need to talk about two fundamental drives that she mentions:
Okay.
mating and bonding.
Okay. Break it down for me.
So mating, as you might guess, is driven by that primal instinct, that urge to procreate. Very deeply rooted in our mammalian brains. This is where the Coolidge effect comes into play. It pushes us towards novelty and ultimately leads to habituation. Then we have bonding. Bonding is all about long-term connection. It's the glue that holds couples together.
But aren't both of those, like, essential for a successful relationship?
They are. You're absolutely right. It's not about choosing one over the other. The key is finding that balance. And Robinson suggests that understanding the post-orgasmic cycle might be really crucial in achieving this balance.
Okay, post-orgasmic cycle, what is that?
So research suggests that after orgasm, both men and women experience this 2-week cycle of hormonal shifts. And it can impact everything: our moods, our perception of our partners.
2 weeks.
Really? I know. It's surprising, right? But it is something to consider. During the cycle, there's a dip in dopamine, which is, that feel-good neurochemical, and there's a rise in prolactin, which is a hormone that's linked to suppressing desire.
Oh, wow. So we're talking, like, actual biological changes for a while after orgasm. Could this be why, like, some of those arguments, those little relationship squabbles, they just seem to come out of nowhere?
It's definitely a possibility. These hormonal fluctuations, they can manifest in all these subtle ways that we might not even be aware of. Increased irritability, we might be a little bit more critical of our partner. Even a sense that something's just not right. It's like wearing, a pair of slightly distorted glasses for 2 weeks after each orgasm.
No, that's a great analogy. Okay, so we've got this mating, the bonding, the post-orgasmic cycle. But then Robinson takes it even further. She ties all of this into ancient wisdom. Is she saying that, like, our ancestors, they already had a handle on this stuff?
It is. It's a really thought-provoking connection. It seems like those ancient practices and traditions, they sort of echo this understanding, this awareness of the potential downsides of excessive orgasm. Like take, for example, Taoist sexual practices. They emphasize conserving sexual
Oh,
energy.
yeah.
And it really seems to align with what Robinson's saying.
That's so interesting. It's like they intuitively understood these biological processes, centuries ago.
Mhm.
And even in early Christianity, you had the idea of spiritual marriage where couples practice abstinence. It seems like they might have been onto something too.
Yeah, it does seem to point to this long-standing awareness of this delicate balance. And this leads us to a concept called carezza. It's this form of lovemaking that's been practiced across various cultures for centuries. And with carezza, the focus is on connection and intimacy without reaching orgasm.
Lovemaking without orgasm. Okay. That sounds different to say the least.
I understand the skepticism, but that's the beauty of carezza. It's not about denying pleasure. It's about shifting the focus away from, the goal of orgasm and instead cultivating deeper intimacy through this gentle, mindful touch. It's about savoring the journey rather than rushing toward the destination.
Okay. I'm starting to see how that could change like the whole dynamic. But I have to ask, how do you actually do carezza? It seems a bit abstract.
Well, in her book, Robinson offers some concrete guidance. She talks about these ecstatic exchanges, which are essentially these structured exercises for couples who are exploring this approach. She even uses this brilliant analogy of rubbing your thumb against your index finger to illustrate the difference between a vigorous, goal-oriented touch and a gentle, nourishing touch.
Okay, I'm intrigued by this thumb rubbing analogy. Tell me more.
So imagine you're rubbing your thumb against your index finger, but with a lot of force. Eventually, it just becomes numb. The
Oh,
nerves sort of shut down.
right.
But when you use this gentle, mindful touch, you can perceive all these subtle nuances, the warmth, the texture, the different pressures. It's a completely different experience.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it's like you're tuning into the subtleties rather than going for that big bang.
Exactly. And that's the essence of carezza. It's about being present, attuned to your partner, and experiencing the full spectrum of sensation that's available when you slow down and let go of that need for that climactic release.
It's almost like you're rewiring your brain and your body to experience pleasure in this completely new way.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And she really dives deep into this concept in her book. But before we go further into the practical side of carezza, I think we need to address the elephant in the room.
You mean what to do with all that pent-up energy if you're not, aiming for orgasm?
Precisely. It's a question that comes up often, and she addresses it in a surprisingly positive way.
Okay, let's hear.
Instead of viewing this energy as a problem to be solved, she suggests embracing it as a powerful force that can be channeled in all sorts of constructive ways. It's about recognizing that sexual energy is this potent life force that can be harnessed, directed towards creativity, towards personal growth, even acts of service and kindness.
Wow, that's such an interesting perspective. It's like you're reclaiming that energy and giving it this whole new purpose.
Exactly. And she gives some practical tips on how to do just that. But that's a conversation for another time. For now, let's shift gears back to the book's central theme, Cupid's poison arrow. We've got lots more to cover.
It's almost like focusing just on orgasm. It's like we're
Yeah.
putting blinders on,
Yeah.
you know, we're missing out on all that depth and the richness that intimacy can have.
Yeah, that's a really powerful way to put it. And that really gets at the core of what Robinson's saying in Cupid's Poison Arrow, this idea that by always seeking that peak, we might actually be missing out on those subtler, more enduring connections that come from prioritizing bonding
It's
behaviors.
like we're so focused on the fireworks, the big finale,
Mm.
that we miss the beauty of the entire symphony.
Exactly. And when you think about the post-orgasmic cycle and how it can impact our brain chemistry, it makes even more sense. Remember, we were talking about those dopamine dips and the prolactin surges?
Right.
Those can have a real impact on how we feel, how we interact with our partners.
Yeah. And we talked about how those hormonal fluctuations can lead to all those things, like the irritability, the criticism, even that feeling of distance. But how does Carezza actually counter those effects?
Okay, well, this is where things get really interesting. By shifting the focus away from orgasm, Carezza allows for the release of different hormones, like oxytocin, which is often called the cuddle hormone.
Oh, yeah, oxytocin. I've definitely heard of that. That's the one that's associated with like bonding and feeling close to someone, right?
That's it. It plays this huge role in fostering trust and connection, empathy. It's what makes us want to snuggle up with our loved ones, to feel safe and secure.
It's funny because we often talk about those butterflies in the beginning of a relationship, that intense, almost addictive passion, which is probably driven by dopamine. But maybe what we should be striving for is that warmth and contentment, that deep sense of knowing and being known by another person.
That is beautifully said. And that's exactly what Carezza aims to cultivate. Slowing down, being present with your partner, savoring the subtle nuances of touch and connection, creating that space for oxytocin to flourish.
It makes so much sense. But I got to be honest, I'm still a bit fuzzy on how to actually practice Carezza. It seems like such a big departure from what we're used to.
I understand. It can feel a bit daunting. But remember Robinson's analogy of rubbing your thumb. It's a good place to start. That contrast between vigorous, goal-oriented touch and gentle, nourishing touch. That really captures the heart of Carezza.
Okay, so instead of rushing towards that climax, it's more about exploring those little variations in pressure, the temperature, the texture.
Precisely. Being fully present in your body, attuning to your partner's energy.
Yeah.
And Robinson offers more guidance, too. Remember those ecstatic exchanges we mentioned earlier?
Right.
Those are structured exercises that guide couples through different stages of Carezza. Gentle touch, energy work, exploring different positions, breathing techniques, all while avoiding orgasm.
So it's like a roadmap for navigating this whole new world of intimacy.
Exactly. It's a journey. And one thing to keep in mind is Carezza isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It's about finding what works for you and your partner, experimenting, communicating, being open about what you need, what you desire. It's really a process of discovery.
That's good to hear. It's reassuring. What about those bonding behaviors that happen, outside the bedroom? Do those matter in a Carezza-based relationship?
Oh, they're absolutely crucial. In fact, Carezza isn't just about lovemaking. It's about cultivating a whole lifestyle of connection and intimacy, prioritizing those things like cuddling, eye-gazing, sharing heartfelt conversations, just enjoying each other's company.
So recognizing that intimacy isn't just one thing, it exists on a spectrum, right? And we can nourish our relationships in so many ways beyond just the sexual stuff.
Precisely. And when we start to weave those bonding behaviors into our daily lives, it creates this beautiful foundation of trust and connection. And that can enhance every aspect of our relationships, including our sexual experiences.
It's amazing to think that by embracing Carezza, we might not only transform our sex lives, but we could actually deepen that emotional connection
Yeah.
and have a much more harmonious and fulfilling relationship overall.
That's the beauty of it. It's a holistic approach that acknowledges this interconnectedness,
Yep.
the physical, emotional, spiritual well-being. But we have to acknowledge making the shift, it can be challenging. We're so used to thinking of orgasm as the goal.
Right.
Letting go of that can feel, kind of counterintuitive.
It's true. We've been basically programmed to think that sex always has to lead to this big grand finale.
Exactly. But like any new skill, patience, communication, a willingness to experiment, those are key.
Yeah.
And Robinson provides some really helpful advice for navigating those challenges.
Like what if you're like with a partner who's really skeptical of this whole idea?
She really emphasizes open and honest communication, starting by focusing on those shared benefits of Carezza, that increased connection, that intimacy, approaching the conversation with patience, listening to your partner's concerns. Remember, this is a journey you're embarking on together.
So it's about teamwork, working together to find this new path, a new path to intimacy that works for both people.
Exactly. And, even if your partner's not initially on board with Carezza, simply understanding the post-orgasmic cycle and the impact it can have on your relationship, that in itself can be huge.
It's like having this secret decoder ring for your relationship.
I love that analogy. It's about gaining this deeper understanding of what's happening beneath the surface, and then that gives you the power to make more conscious choices. Choices that lead to a love life that's aligned with your values and your desires.
So even if you don't end up practicing Carezza, just knowing about all this can be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. It's about broadening our perspective on intimacy, recognizing that there are so many paths to connection and fulfillment. And who knows, maybe by just exploring these ideas, we'll unlock this whole new world of possibilities.
I love that. It's about opening ourselves up to these new ways of experiencing love,
Yeah.
experiencing pleasure. And I think this leads perfectly into the final chapter of our deep dive here. We've explored the science, the ancient wisdom, the practicality of Carezza. But there's this one big question that I think is still out there. What are the potential consequences of this shift? Not just for, our individual relationships, but for society as a whole.
Ah, yes. The big picture. This is where things get really interesting because Robinson actually delves into the potential societal impact of our current very orgasm-centric culture.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's her take on that?
Well, Robinson suggests that this whole focus on reaching that orgasmic peak, it might actually be contributing to this broader sense of like disconnect and dissatisfaction, not just in our love lives, but in society as a whole. That's right. Her argument is if we're always chasing after that dopamine rush, that fleeting feeling of pleasure, we might become, well, less inclined to invest in the slower, the more nurturing aspects of connection.
Hmm.
Those bonding behaviors that are so essential for building those strong relationships, those strong communities.
So it's like we're sacrificing that long-term fulfillment for those quick hits of pleasure,
Yeah.
right? It's like trading depth for instant gratification.
Yeah, it's a compelling argument, isn't it? Think about all those essential bonding behaviors that we've talked about. The cuddling, the heartfelt conversations, simply being present with our loved ones without any kind of agenda. Those are the building blocks of intimacy, of connection, not just in romantic relationships, but in all our
But
relationships.
those behaviors require, well, they require time, they require patience, a willingness to be vulnerable, to be open.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe in our fast-paced, hyper-stimulated world, maybe we've lost sight of how valuable those simple acts of connection really are.
It's such a good point. It's like we've become almost addicted to the intensity and the immediacy of the orgasmic experience, and in doing so, we've sort of neglected those subtler, those more enduring forms of pleasure that come from simply being present with another person.
And this isn't just about our personal lives, right?
Mhm.
Robinson seems to be implying that this societal emphasis on orgasm, it could actually be impacting our collective well-being.
Exactly. If we're constantly seeking external validation, those quick fixes for our emotional needs, we might become less and less capable of forming those deep, meaningful connections with other people. And that can lead to, isolation, fragmentation within communities,
Mhm.
when people are prioritizing individual pleasure over shared experiences.
Yeah. It's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? This idea that our pursuit of individual pleasure might actually be undermining our ability to create a more connected, more fulfilling society.
It's a complex issue. There's no doubt about that. But I think by becoming aware of these dynamics, we can start to make more conscious choices about how we approach intimacy, how we approach connection, both in our own lives and in the broader culture.
It's like we're at this crossroads. We can either continue down this path of instant gratification and disconnection, or or we can choose to forge a new path, one that prioritizes depth, authenticity, genuine human connection.
And that's where Robinson's work, it really offers, I think, a glimmer of hope by embracing those principles of Carezza, slowing down, savoring the journey, cultivating connection through mindful touch, through presence. We can start to shift our focus away from those fleeting pleasures of orgasm and towards those more enduring joys of genuine intimacy.
It's like we're being invited to rediscover the art of slow love, where the destination is less important than the shared journey.
Beautifully put. It's about recognizing that true intimacy, it's a dance. It's not a race to the finish line. And by embracing this more mindful, this more intentional approach to connection, well, we can create, these ripples of positive change that extend far beyond our individual relationships.
I love that. Ripples of positive change. It's a good reminder that even those small shifts in our own choices, they can have a really profound impact on the world around us.
And who knows, maybe by embracing these principles, we can start to heal some of that fragmentation, that disconnection that seems to plague our modern society. Perhaps we can create a world where love is less about that fleeting pleasure and more about deep, lasting connection. A world where we value the journey just as much as the destination.
It's a beautiful vision, and I think it's one that we can all aspire to. It's been amazing exploring these ideas with you today. I have to say, I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on love, on intimacy, and the potential for human connection.
I feel the same way. It's been a privilege to share this deep dive with you and with our listeners.
And as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. What if By embracing those principles of carezza, by prioritizing those essential bonding behaviors, what if we could create a world where love is less about that fleeting pleasure and more about deep, lasting connection? A world where we celebrate the beauty of slow love and the transformative power of genuine human connection.
It's a beautiful vision and one that we believe is within our reach. So go forth, dear listeners, and experiment, explore, discover all those boundless possibilities of love that await you. Until next time, may your relationships be filled with joy, with connection, and with the exquisite dance of intimacy.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Cupid's poisoned arrow.
It's been a pleasure.